my topic for today's presentation is imaging in shoulder dislocation. So the first question that comes in our mind is that why shoulder joint dislocates so frequently? So what is the reason behind this? So as we know that shoulder joint is developed in a way that it provides more much wider range of motion. So there is advantages of the range of motion, but because of this, there is a disadvantage of vulnerability to injury and development of instability. So both these things they go hand in hand. When we talk about shoulder dislocation, it presents patient may present with a wide variety of clinical symptoms, and sometimes the diagnosis can be very obvious, or sometimes it is entirely unsuspected. So, patient can present with broad spectrum of clinical complaints and presentation, and that's why the role of radiology comes in. So, what are the clinical scenarios in which patient can present with shoulder dislocation? Patient can present with anterior glenohumeral instability, which is the most common type of shoulder dislocation. Second, we can have posterior glenohumeral instability. And thirdly, patient may present with multidirectional instability, which is rare, and it is because of developmental glenohumeral hypermobility. So the most common type is anterior one, and a patient can present with acute first time shoulder dislocation or chronic instability with repeated dislocation. So when there is chronic instability, with every dislocation, less degree of force and provocation is required. And anterior and posterior glenohumeral instability both are traumatic, whereas multidirectional instability is generally atraumatic in nature. And there is a short form, that is TUBS, which is used for anterior and posterior dislocation. So T stands for traumatic, U stands for unidirectional, because either the dislocation will be anterior or it will be posterior. Then it is treated by Bankart surgery. Whereas multidirectional instability is remembered by this mnemonic AMRI, that is atraumatic, multidirectional, bilateral, and it is treated with rehabilitation or inferior capsular shift if it is required. Then now let us talk about the role of imaging. So in the acute setting following first time shoulder dislocation, imaging is used to characterize the location and extent of shoulder structure damage. So in acute setting, when there is no doubt in the diagnosis, we already know that patient is having anterior shoulder dislocation and patient has come for MRI. So what we are going to look at is to see the location and extent of structural damage. And if there is repeated dislocation, though then when the clinical diagnosis is not is very obvious and there is no doubt, so imaging helps to guide the surgical planning and choice of stabilizing procedure. So now let us talk about the choice of imaging modality that we can use. So starting with the conventional radiography, which is easily available every time at every place, and so it is the first imaging modality, but findings may not be very obvious. So looking at this radiograph, this is AP shoulder neutral projection, and we can see, okay, there is some kind of depression over the posterolateral aspect of humeral head, and there is some defect kind of thing in the anterior aspect of glenoid, but we are not very sure. So at this point of time, we can offer some special projections which can help us to evaluate the lesions better. Like for example, Stryker's notch view. So in this, patient acquires this position and we take the radiograph. So the defect was not very well seen on AP, but now you can very well visualize how nicely the defect is seen. Or sometimes it is very obvious, like in this case there is anterior shoulder dislocation subcoracoid type, and there is no doubt in this. Secondly, ultrasound. Role of ultrasound is very limited. We can use ultrasound for rotator cuff pathologies, and it is proven. The role of ultrasound is proved in rotator cuff pathologies, but In case of labral lesions, it is not very sensitive because labrum is otherwise very hidden structure, and it is difficult to evaluate the labrum with the help of ultrasound. Next is computed tomography. For computed tomography, bony Bankart lesion, Hill-Sachs lesions can be visualized in a better way. But for soft tissue injuries like labral lesion and glenohumeral ligament or rotator cuff injury, it does not give much information. And generally, orthopedic surgeons, they like to see the VRT images and 4D images of the joint, and they like to look the Hill-Sachs lesion and Bankart lesion. They can measure, or so they frequently advise patients CT shoulder in cases of anterior glenohumeral instability. So like in this CT image, we can see there is a fracture of the anterior inferior aspect of glenoid rim. So there is bony Bankart. Next is the MRI. So MRI is the imaging modality of choice without any doubt. It is best for assessing the soft tissue injury, and it also helps in measuring the glenoid bone loss. And there are many articles which shows that MRI is as good as CT for measuring the glenoid bone loss. Then why to go for CT and expose the patient to additional radiation exposure? So MRI can be used for soft tissue injury as well as for measuring the glenoid bone loss. And we can inject contrast in the joint, and we can acquire special projections like Aber technique. But we have to keep this in mind that MR orthography is of any role only in chronic settings, not in acute setting, because in acute setting joint is already filled with fluid and there might be joint effusion. So MR orthography is not going to help much, and we are already having distended joint. Now let us discuss in detail anterior glenohumeral instability. So more than 95% of total shoulder dislocation account for anterior dislocation, and it is due to fall on an outstretched hand and is generally seen in younger patients of 35 to 40 years of age. In older patients, it may result in acute RCT tear, avulsion fractures of greater tuberosity, or tear of the subscapular wrist muscle and anterior capsule. And there are three types of anterior shoulder dislocation. Subcoracoid is the most common type. Then we have subglenoid, subclavicular, and some rare varieties like intrathoracic can be seen. So what are the factors which influence recurrent dislocation? The patient has presented with first time anterior shoulder dislocation, and now we have to evaluate whether this patient is prone for further dislocation or not. So it depends on the location and severity of structural damage, and it also depends on the age of presentation. If patient is young, then it is more likely that patient will have recurrent dislocation. And if patient is involved in sports activity, if is not giving up these activities, then there are more chances of further recurrent dislocation. And it is also more in males as compared to females. And it is important to know these factors because they guide us in the proper management. Like in older patients who are less prone for recurrent dislocation, they can be managed with the help of non-surgical techniques, whereas young athletes, they will require stabilizing surgery. So what are the osseous lesions that we see in anterior shoulder dislocation? So what happens in anterior shoulder dislocation? This head of humerus, it comes anteriorly and it strikes the anterior inferior glenoid rim, and because of this impact, what happens, there forms a defect, impaction fracture over the posterolateral aspect of humeral head, and you may get tear of the anterior glenoid labrum, or with or without fracture of the glenoid bone. So this is Bankart lesion. This is soft Bankart when there is only injury involving the labrum, but if it is involving the bone, it is bony Bankart. This is a patient with anterior shoulder dislocation, and we can see this is the Hill-Sachs defect, with intense marrow edema, and this is the anteroinferior aspect of glenoid, which is showing defect, and joint is filled with hemorrhage. So Hirsch's lesion, for there is an important point for Hirsch's lesion. It should be evaluated at or above the level of coracoid process in axial plane, because below the level of coracoid process there is normally a depression here. So don't get confused whether this is Hirsch's or this is a normal depression. So you should always see it at or above the level of coracoid process on the axial plane. Then what are the associated injuries? There can be avulsion of anteroinferior glenohumeral ligament or capsule from the glenoid or humerus. There can be fracture of the glenoid, humeral head, tuberosities or coracoid process. There can be tear of the rotator cuff, and it is generally seen in older age group. Then there can be vascular injuries, or there can be injuries to the nerve, like brachial plexus and axillary nerve. So now let us see this case. A 20-year-old male with history of dislocation and pain in right shoulder. So we are going from inferior to superior, and this is the glenohumeral joint. Okay, so there is no edema. Okay, right. So grossly we are not able to actually make out what is happening in this joint, and so what we can do further, we can inject contrast within the joint and give an arthrographic effect, and after doing the MR arthrography we can now see this is a beautiful Hirsch's defect that we can see in the posterior-superior aspect of humeral head, and inferiorly we can see there is Bankart lesion. Okay, so anteroinferior aspect of glenoid labrum is not seen and it is torn. So it was not well visualized in the non-orthographic sequence, but here we can very well visualize the bony and labral lesions. Second case, the 25-year-old male with traumatic anterior shoulder dislocation. So we are going from superior to inferior. Okay. All right. So what we can see is there is a Hirsch's defect here, right? And there is a fracture of the anteroinferior aspect of glenoid. This is the sagittal image, and here we can see this irregularity and loss of the bone on the anteroinferior aspect of the glenoid bone, right? And this is the CT of the patient, and here we can see this is the bony Bankart. Here also we can see this is the bony Bankart, and here also you can see this is a bony Bankart. Next case, a 40-year-old male with traumatic anterior shoulder dislocation. So we are coming from inferior to superior, and we can see there is a Hirsch's defect, large Hirsch's defect, and there is loss of the anterior labrum, anteroinferior labrum, and besides that we can see lot of edema over here. So what is happening? We have to look for the cause. So we can see this is the coracoid process, and the tip of coracoid process is not well visualized here, and there is lot of edema. So what are the structures that attach over the tip of coracoid process? Can anybody tell me? Okay, so there is insertion of pectoralis minor, and there is origin of the short head of biceps and coracobrachialis from the coracoid process. And as I have already said that in older patients, patient is 40-year-old, so older patients may have additional injuries like fracture of the greater tuberosity or fracture of the coracoid process. So in this patient there was fracture of the coracoid process. So here we can see this is the coracoid process, and this is the avulsion fracture of the coracoid process, and this was an additional injury which required attention. This is another case in which additional injury that can be seen is greater tuberosity fracture. So now let us discuss about the on-track and off-track shoulder lesions. So we have to measure for that glenoid track and Hilscher's interval. So we are seeing a sagittal image and of the glenoid in MRI, and here we draw a oval shaped circle which covers the glenoid, and then we take maximum dimension uh, in the mid part. So this is capital D. Then we have a small d, that is dimension of the bone loss, and this is the formula, that is 0.83 into capital D minus D. So this dimension gives us the glenoid tract. And how do we measure the Hilscher's interval? We measure the width of the Hilscher's defect and width of the bone stalk, that is between the defect and the rotator cuff muscles. And so this is Hilscher's interval. And if Hilscher's interval is wider, then it is more likely to get engaged. So this leads to off-track lesion or engaging lesion. So a bipolar lesion is said to be engaging if the Hilscher's interval is larger than the glenoid tract, and they are generally treated surgically with reconstitution of the glenoid bone stock. So what is the spectrum of Bankart lesion? We can have only soft Bankart when there is rupture of the labrum and with the periosteum, or we can have fracture of the bone, or we can have only avulsion of the labrum but intact periosteum. So this is known as Perthes lesion, or we can have labral tear along with injury to the articular cartilage, or there can be rupture of the labrum with medialization, that is Alpsa lesion. Okay, so now let us see what is happening in this case. So here we can see this is the labrum which is torn, and along with that we can see striped periosteum. So this is Perthes lesion. Next is we can see here we can't visualize the glenoid labrum, and here a hypointensive structure is seen medially. So what is this? This is the medialized labrum, that is Alpsa lesion, and it is dislocated medially. Next is we can have a rupture of the inferior glenohumeral ligament from the humeral side. So this is J-shaped inferiorly displaced Hagel or humeral detachment of anterior glenohumeral ligament. Then treatment options are arthroscopic stabilization or open repair. So in case of first time traumatic dislocation or such as Hilscher's, Bankart, or Perthes lesion are present, then patient can undergo arthroscopic stabilization. And even if there is recurrent dislocation with or without hyperlaxity, patient can undergo arthroscopic stabilization. But if there is osseous or bony Bankart, then patient may need open repair, or if there is a large posterior humeral head defect, then patient may need open repair, or if there is very severe associated injuries like cuff injuries, fractures, glenohumeral ligament avulsions, and neurovascular trauma. So let us look at this radiograph. Can anybody tell me what is happening here and what is abnormal here? Okay, so this is a AP radiograph of shoulder in the neutral view, neutral position. And what we can see, the head of humerus is looking like a light bulb. And so this is light bulb sign, and this is generally seen in posterior shoulder dislocation. And it is because of internal rotation of the posteriorly dislocated humeral head. And what we generally see in AP shoulder neutral position is that we see this crescent shaped half moon thing, and so this half moon overlap sign should be present. If it is not seen, then we have to look for the posterior dislocation. So let us discuss posterior shoulder dislocation. It constitutes approximately 2% of total shoulder dislocation. It is bilateral, and generally bilateral. So bilateral dislocation is not uncommon, and it is often associated with convulsive seizures, especially with epilepsy, electric shock, either accidental or therapeutic. So let us see this case. A 30-year-old male patient who presented to the emergency department with complaint of single episode of seizure during sleep. and that seizure lasted for about 10 to 15 minutes. And following seizure, patient had post-ictal confusion and pain in bilateral shoulder with restrictions of movement. So this is the AP radiograph of the chest along with bilateral shoulder joint. So what we are seeing here is comminuted fracture involving the both heads of humerus, right? And this is the CT image of the same patient where we can see comminuted displaced fracture involving the head of humerus. So these types of injuries can be seen when there is severe uh, convulsive seizure, and it leads to contraction of the infraspinatus and posterior scapular muscles, and this pulls the humerus posteriorly and it impacts against the glenoid, and it can lead to, if patient is having other comorbidities also, so patient can present with fracture also. So the point of showing this case was that you can encounter such type of disease entity also in your practice. So it is not necessary that you get a classic posterior shoulder dislocation. You may get comminuted displaced fractures. So what is happening here? Here we can see this patient presented with posterior shoulder dislocation, and here we can see a reverse Hirschsprung's defect which is seen on anteromedial aspect, and the reverse bank gut lesion which is seen on the posterior side. Next is multidirectional instability. It is seen in both athletic or non-athletic individuals with excessive capsular laxity, and the incidence is higher in females than in males. And etiologies can range from anatomic defects to neuromuscular or biochemical abnormalities. So generally we don't see much in imaging on multidirectional instability, but sometimes you can get some subtle sclerosis on the anterior and posterior aspect of glenoid. So this is what we get in MDI. Now take home points are: take proper clinical history. Whenever a patient comes for imaging, take his history, see his radiograph, and if he's not having any investigation, you can ask for, and then talk to the orthopedic surgeon and what is their concerns, what they want in imaging, what is their requirement, and always check radiograph which is available with the patient. It is a good habit to check, and then finally describe the imaging findings and make a diagnosis. So this was all about my presentation, and thank you so much.